We're going to call up our next speaker, which is Dave Clausen, Dr. Dave Clausen. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak at this conference. Today I want to give you a short summary about CWD, and you might wonder why I'm doing this. Well, ultimately, CWD may have some influence on our wolves in this state. But first I want to give you a short summary of CWD past and present in Wisconsin, and then I'd like to talk about a couple of recent developments that are likely to have a significant impact on CWD management going forward. And then I hope to have time for some questions. I'm speaking today as a veterinarian that has studied this disease actually starting in 1997. And I'm also an avid hunter, as you know. And I started hunting when I was 12, and I have not missed a deer season since. And while I was a beef farmer for almost 35 years, venison is still my red meat of choice. People ask me, how can you shoot those beautiful creatures? My answer is that when I look through my scope, I don't see a deer as most of you see. Rather, this is what I see. Butterflied venison loin, marinated and grilled medium rare, and it does melt in your mouth. So how has CWD behaved in Wisconsin? In 2002, Dane and Iowa counties accounted for the majority of the positive samples, with single positives in Richland, Sauk, and Walworth. So if we fast forward, CWD is now in 18 of our counties, or 25%. The results for the past 4 years should be viewed in the context that fewer than 5,000 samples were taken in this affected area. Had there been 20,000 samples taken as back in 2006, there'd likely be a lot more dots on this map. So what does the future hold? Science shows us that left unchecked, CWD will continue to expand geographically. This is a distribution map of positive deer in the Colorado-Wyoming area. While CWD was likely present at some low level prior to 1985 when it was discovered in wild deer, mule deer in both Colorado and Wyoming, most of this geographic expansion has occurred in the last 30 years. Keep in mind that this occurred in populations with density that are much lower than we have in Wisconsin. Let's superimpose this map onto Wisconsin. We're about 14 years into our epidemic here. I'll leave it to each of you to speculate what our distribution map is going to look like in another 15 years. Prevalence in an area where the disease is established continues to expand exponentially. What's happening in north central Iowa and the Wyoming Valley here is pretty representative, and it should come as no surprise. As far back as 1995, a study by Miller and Connor demonstrated similar disease behavior in Colorado. Notice how the prevalence appears to have remained relatively constant until 2006 or 2007. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. At some point, CWD will impact deer population levels here, as it has in other places. This is Hunt Area 65 in southeast Wyoming, and CWD levels have increased to over 40% there, while the populations declined by over 50%. There are very few trophy bucks in this area because they just don't live long enough to grow antlers like that. And there's no indication of any kind of plateau. Near Boulder, Colorado, the deer populations decreased in an unhunted area, decreased over 45%, as CWD infections soared to over 40% in males. And it's not limited just to deer. A U.S. government study on the elk in Rocky Mountain National Park found that CWD was killing elk faster than they could reproduce and predicted steep population declines. A modeling study by Wyoming game and fish veterinarian Terry Krieger predicted nearly complete extirpation of the elk in that state in less than 100 years, barring a genetic shift to a strain of elk that are partially resistant to CWD. The problem with that idea is that even the resistant elk die from CWD. It just takes them a little longer and allows them more time to contaminate the environment with prion. The number of animals tested for CWD here in Wisconsin has declined drastically. The DNR is only testing 1/5 of what it once did. For budgetary reasons, they're trying to be more strategic in their sampling. But in my opinion, the sample numbers are so few that they really don't have a good handle on the distribution of the disease anymore. In 2014, they tested 80% less deer than in 2002 and found almost 60% more positives. This decrease in testing has other ramifications as well, and I will cover that later. Graphically, it looks like this. Blue gets smaller, red gets larger. Another area of concern is the increasing consumption of CWD-positive carcasses by our citizens. By multiplying the number of deer harvested each year between 2002 and 2013 in 9 counties in the CWD management zone, by the percentage of deer that were positive in each county, I estimated the number of positive carcasses harvested. While a statistician might be able to argue somewhat with the exactness of my numbers, what can't be argued is the trend. And the increase in positive carcasses that are likely entering the food chain is alarming. This is a quote from an article by Paul Smith. In 2006, Wisconsin started to abandon sharpshooting and other aggressive measures against CWD. Illinois did not. Since that time, the course of the disease in the two states have been sharply divergent. Illinois is still in that 1% to 2% area. We're up in, as you can see from the other slide, in some areas well over 30%. These are some graphs I constructed in 2009 from raw data from Wisconsin DNR CWD test results. Based on these prevalence graphs, it appears that the efforts to keep CWD in check were working, much like the sharpshooting efforts in Illinois. The expected rise, exponential rise in prevalence, for the most part, did not occur until 2006. It's interesting to note that by that time, the department was well aware that hunter harvest alone would not be sufficient to control CWD, but the highly charged political atmosphere made it impossible to even raise the issue of non-traditional control methods. The science of CWD continues to evolve and expand. This headline appeared in the June 1, 2015 edition of Food Safety News. It deals with recently published research by Claudio Soto and fellow researchers at the University of Texas, Houston and Colorado State University. Soto found that wheatgrass contaminated by urine, brain, and feces of infected deer did not easily wash off and was capable of causing CWD in susceptible species. Plants were also shown to absorb the prions out of the soil and also cause infection. Similar work by Chris Johnson at the National Wildlife Health Center in Madison demonstrated this was true of other species of plants such as alfalfa, corn, barley, and tomatoes. One of the consequences of this discovery is a potential impact on Wisconsin's agricultural economy. Let's just set aside any possible CWD impact on sheep, cattle, and humans. Let's look at what's proven. We know that all species of cervids are susceptible to CWD, and now it's proven that plants can take up CW prion and infect cervids. So let's just suppose that CWD was present in Brazil or Argentina rather than in the US and Canada. How anxious do you think we would be to import feed grains that could infect our confined and wild cervids and establish this disease in our country? How anxious do you think the Brits or other European countries are going to be to take a risk like that? What is the probability that grain marketers in countries free from CWD would use that fact as an advantage to the products of their producers when it comes to exporting them? When you're dealing with markets, perception, rumor, and speculation are as important as fact. And if our agricultural markets are threatened, agriculture will respond. A threat to agriculture is a threat to our wildlife. Then there's the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Renderers in the CWD area cite this section as reason not to accept material from any deer that has been tested for CWD, at least there's proof that their products are contaminated. They'll take untested carcasses, just not the tested ones. Will this provision become an issue? because of the plant uptake of Prion. The Canadian government considered banning the export of feed pellets made from grain screenings because of evidence the product contained deer feces and urine from contaminated piles of grain that had been stored outside. At the present time, I'm not aware that any testing has been done on commercial feed grains and hay. Current tests to detect CWD are expensive and are probably not sensitive enough right now to detect Prion in a load of grain or a load of hay or a bin full of grain. Science does, however, evolve. The tests that are available today for CWD are many times more sensitive than those that we had when CWD first came on the scene. My only prediction here is that there are interesting times ahead. Stay tuned. Is there a risk of CWD infecting humans? I'm going to start out by saying, as does the CDC, that there is no strong evidence that humans have contracted CWD from eating infected venison. However, the existence of multiple strains of CWD, each with a possibly different spectrum of infectivity, along with increasing stabilization and infectivity of the prion that comes about through multiple passages from one deer to the next, and conflicting laboratory studies, have made this issue a subject of much speculation and debate in the scientific community. In this 2005 study, researchers injected CWD prion intracerebrally into mice that had been genetically modified to express either human or cervid characteristics. After approximately 600 to 700 days, the mice expressing human characteristics showed no sign of disease, nor was there any evidence of CWD prion found in the examination of their brain. The mice expressing the cervid characteristics, on the other hand, all developed CWD in less than 200 days. The conclusion was that there is a substantial species barrier to human transmission of elk CWD. This study was it is still prominently displayed on the CDC's website and is widely cited as evidence that CWD is unlikely to transfer to humans. Science, however, does evolve. In 2002, a French researcher, Vincent Beringue, found that with regard to interspecies transmission, the evidence of infection was up to 7 times more likely to be found in lymphoid tissue than in brain tissue. The researchers from Case Western went back and re-examined the tissues from the original study. Their findings were presented at a recent conference, an International Prion Conference in Fort Colorado. They detected infectious prion in the spleen of 2 of 140 mice from an initial study, even though it was not found in the brains. And I'm going to, you can read this, but I'm going to read this also, that furthermore, a recent bioassay with natural CWD isolates in a new humanized transgenic mouse line led to clinical prion infection in 2 out of 20 mice. These results indicate that the CWD prion has the potential to infect human CNS and peripheral lymphoid tissues, and that there might be asymptomatic human carriers of CWD infection. So, while this study pretty well blows the original study right out of the water, it doesn't mean that human infection with CWD is a foregone conclusion. The odds of CWD transmission to humans have always been very small, but they've never been 0. This study serves to emphasize that fact and point out that the science of CWD continues to evolve. It raises more questions than it answers, and it demonstrates the need for more research and surveillance. The study should also send a precautionary message to those eating CWD, eating untested venison or venison testing positive from CWD areas. While I did not see a press release announcing the fact, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services has recently updated their recommendations regarding consumption of venison from the CWD areas to reflect current science. And again, the Wisconsin Division of Public Health recommends that venison from deer harvested inside the CWD management zone not be consumed or distributed to others until CWD test results on the source deer are known to be negative. That's a real change from what they used to do. They used to say CDC recommends don't eat it, but wink, wink, nobody ever has gotten sick from it. So this is pretty significant. And I think when this research from this abstract that I read to you from is published in August, it's going to cause a fair stir. One problem that is, despite the DHS recommendations, the DNR has been cutting back on testing. It's getting more difficult to get a gear tested. And whether or how the DNR is going to make additional testing available is an unanswered question. The jury's out on that. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a question here.
My hunting is 12 miles from where they found the CWD in Shell Lake. And so we test every adult deer. I don't test the fawns. The odds of a fawn being infected are less, and the risk of me getting killed in a car accident driving to my hunting camp are probably much greater than they are from that. But at least if I died from the car accident, it'd be sudden. So yes, I'm concerned about it, and DNR is not doing enough to determine the extent of infection up in that area. They're just plain not testing enough deer to find it at the low level it's likely present at.
Have black bears ever been tested for CWD?
Black bears?
Yes.
I think that there was a study done in Wisconsin on car-killed scavengers and that type of thing. Canids are not known to be susceptible to prion-type infections. Felines, on the other hand, are. And there was a study done at the University of Wisconsin back 2005, 2004, something like that, where they went out and picked up raccoons and mink and all that type of thing and examined the brains. However, they examined only the brains. And in light of the research that came out in 2012, and this recent research, when I said more questions are raised than answers, if these previous studies only looked at the brain and not the spleen, does that call him into question? I don't know. But that is a legitimate question.
Okay.
I have a really brief question for you, Dave. I sit on my Deer County board, and just really quickly, in case you guys don't know, the DNR changed it that deer are managed per county now. There's a county advisory. And my concern is that we have some counties that are mostly private land ownership. And when I've said, and this may not be popular, you need to go out and kill all these does and stop preserving your trophy bucks on your land, Iowa and Burnett counties. It doesn't, I don't know what do you think we can do to influence private landowners to open up reducing some of those, especially in southern Wisconsin. I'm not sure that the county model is appropriate for CWD management. So if maybe you could speak to the difference of here they want local control where I think it may not be appropriate.
So first off, I want to thank you for serving on that county committee. It's a thankless job, and you're a glutton for punishment, I know, because I sit on ours up in our county. But I think what you're talking about here, early on, Darrell did some filming for a film that he's trying to make, and one of the comments that Julie Langenberg made was that she doubted that much would be done about CWD until it was shown to be a threat either to agriculture or to humans. I suspect that there are currents going on here that are much larger than I'm going to be influenced or any of the rest of us. And I would add, the gal from Howling for Wolves, when she talked about, all the bad things, and I looked yesterday about all the bad things that were happening in the legislature in Michigan and Minnesota and in Wisconsin. I could look at a lot of those, while they look really bad, I could look at a lot of those as like acts of desperation. And to quote Gandhi, first they ignore you, then they fight you, and then you win. And so I think there are societal forces, there are demographic changes that are coming, and I look at some of these actions as trying to grab on to the last little thing and to hold back progress. So keep up doing what you're doing, and I know that's off my topic, but I just wanted to comment on that. Is it lunchtime?
It's time to eat.
Patricia,
there is
I'll
not
talk
being
to you.
venison served upstairs. But for new people, lunch is directly above this room. You'll see another banquet hall. For the people yesterday, Melissa Tedrow, those people, I am sure that you have vegetarian options today. That's where I was. So we'll reconvene back here right at 1:40 and start
Melissa?
with our next speaker. Yeah.
Daryl actually wrote an article about what a human infection of CWD, a fictional account for the Alberta Outdoorsman, and now I know he has some copies here. So,
Great. All right.
but now let's go to lunch.
All right. Let's clap.